Is it going? Okay. So the OSI model is the basis of everything that we're learning in this book. The OSI model is merely a theoretical framework for how to make devices, how to make software, how to make different aspects of the networking model work. So, as an example, when you build a house, you have blueprints, and those blueprints are based upon, you don't just start making stuff up. You have certain rules and guidelines that you go through. You have to put a foundation down. That foundation may be made out of 5 different products. Could be made out of concrete block. Could be made out of poured concrete. Could be, if it's a cheap house, made out of dirt, sod, what do they call them in the bricks made out of dirt, hardened, baked, clay. Could be made out of a lot of different things, but you still have to have a foundation. And there are certain rules that go along with it based on the type of foundation you have. Then you start building up from there. All of the different components, all the way to the actual furniture in the house, there are certain guidelines, right? You don't put oversized furniture in a house that you can't get through the doors. Well, we've tried it a few times, but it doesn't work real well. There are certain rules and ideas and ways that you do certain things. They can be different. Your house is going to have different furniture than someone else's house, but some of the rules, such as how you get the furniture through the doors, you don't put a bed in the middle of the living room, usually. Certain guidelines. Well, in the same way, computers and networking, which the OSI model defines how all of these different pieces and parts work together. Okay, so that's why when we talk about the OSI model, it's obvious, my metaphor of the home is weak at best, but hopefully it gets you thinking in the right direction. OSI model is very, very important for you to understand each of the layers. How many layers are there in the OSI model? Raise your hand. Yes? 7 layers of the OSI model. You must memorize these 7 layers. There will be a point where I will ask you to regurgitate the 7 layers without any notes, without anything. So you must come up with something. There are lots of different mnemonic things. I think they talk about a couple in the book that you can use. Come up with your own. I'm not even going to tell you how to do that, but come up with your own so that you can memorize it. The objectives for this chapter, the objective domain description, if you look at the certification test requirements, understand the OSI model. That's pretty broad. And then also understand switches. So the stuff we talked about last chapter about switches, we're going to talk about more in depth, and you're going to understand how a switch works. And that will be valuable information when you try to troubleshoot stuff. As an example of the OSI model, a switch operates at multiple levels. They may say it operates at one physical level. The switch operates at the physical level, but it also operates at the second level, okay? And it also, data link layer, it also operates at the networking layer if it's a high-end switch. So that one physical device could address 3 different layers of the OSI model, okay? All right. OSI reference model is used to define how data communication occurs on computer networks. Again, go back to my metaphor of a house, a blueprint, and the rules that are associated with building your house describe and define how you build that house. Well, data communication occurs on computer networks. We have a message coming from Jill that has to go to Miguel. There are certain rules and regulations that are associated with that. And they're defined by a certain organization, which we'll go into in a little bit, okay? If Jill wants to get a message to Miguel, there are different ways of doing it. As long as she follows those rules, and as long as Miguel is capable of following those rules, the message will get from her to him and back again. divided into layers, which are called the 7 layers of the OSI model. The other thing to remember is that these layers communicate with each other. So if I'm writing a networking protocol for layer 3, then I know that I have to be able to talk to layer 4 and layer 5. Okay, I don't have to talk to layer 7 if I'm layer 3. I could care less. Somebody else is going to handle that for me. So if Jill wants to get a message across to Jordan, and there are 7 layers in between, she doesn't have to worry about, communicate. Let's say, for example, Jill speaks English, Zach speaks Portuguese, Miguel speaks Spanish, Austin speaks German, right? Well, Jill needs to be able to speak both English and Portuguese, or he needs to be able to speak English and Portuguese, and he needs to be able to speak Portuguese, I've lost track, and Spanish, or he needs to be able to speak Portuguese, and then he, see what I'm saying? They interact with each other, but she doesn't have to be able to speak Spanish because he's going to translate it for her. Yes?
So they just speak directly to the ones above and below it?
Just the ones directly above it and below it. That's correct. That's what you got to worry about. The layers of that, 7 layers of the OSI model are associated with protocols and devices. As an example, a device in a switch is the physical connection. It's got RJ45 connections, most likely. Very easily have a physical fiber connection. Those are the devices. The protocols, however, if it has an RJ45 connection, it has to be capable of transmitting TCP/IP packets. It has to be capable of, if it's a switch, memorizing MAC addresses. Okay, has to be able to do those. Those are all MAC addresses, Ethernet protocols. All of those are software or protocols, right? Not physical devices. Can anyone name the 7 layers of the OSI model, Caitlin?
Physical, battery, network, transport, session, presentation, application.
Outstanding. I always go, God bless you, I always go from the top down, but she's figured it out. It's actually more accurate to go from the physical layer up. Okay, to go from the physical layer up. You have a diagram in your book, and there's a ton of information out there on the internet about 7 layers of the OSI model. The reason there's a ton of information, different ways of explaining it, you go out and do the research and find the best method for you to understand it. There are videos out there. You guys are all, your generation's all into videos. I'd rather read it because I can do it faster than listen to a boring video. Okay? But whatever works for you, go out and do the research. So if you're confused, as I get done lecturing about this, please feel free. I encourage you, because this is the base of everything else that we're going to learn. And in fact, on a regular basis as we go through it, I'll be asking you, what layer of the OSI model is that addressed? I'll tell you to open up your browser, Internet Explorer. Don't do it. Open up Internet Explorer. What layer of the OSI model is Internet Explorer? Internet Explorer needs to be able to convert host names to IP addresses. What layer is that done on? Yes, you have a question? No, just those were all rhetorical questions, just to give you an example. Okay, so layer 1, and again, layer 1, you usually see this the other way around because of the, layer 1 is the physical layer, that's usually you see at the bottom and then you work your way up. I don't care how you depict it as long as you get, layer 1 is associated with physical, layer 7 is the application layer. When it gets hairy, is like in the transport and session layer and presentation, because there's not real good examples of those like there are in the physical layer, data link layer, so on and so forth. Okay. When Miguel's computer is talking to Zach's computer, or let's use Zach talking to Miguel. So Zach's computer is on the left-hand side, Miguel's computer is on the right-hand side. Zach wants to send Miguel an email. Okay? So here's what happens. He is the source, or the original origin, he is the destination. He is the transmitting computer, he is the receiving computer. Lots of stuff in between, right? Got a wireless access point, And if he's sending him an email, we've got servers, we've got all this stuff out there in the cloud, but the bottom line is, he's got to send a message to him. He needs to receive it. We haven't even talked about getting back to him, because maybe he wants to respond back to him. But right now, he needs to send him a message, an important message. Okay, important message. I don't know what it would be. Who knows? All right, so here's how it works. Transmitting computer. At the application layer, if you're sending an email, what do you think the application layer that Miguel is going to be involved in, what do you think that application layer is going to be? Give me an application that he's going to be using.
Outlook.
Raise your hands. Someone over here. Q!
Email.
And yeah. What email application? Microsoft Outlook. So, at the application layer, Zach is using Microsoft Outlook. Okay? At the presentation layer, let's jump down to the tell you what, let's jump down to the physical layer. So as he compiles this email, he sends that email. It goes through all those different layers. At the physical layer, what do you think device or protocol is being used at the physical layer for him to send a message to him right now? Yes, Austin.
Computer itself.
I need more specifics. Yes.
Access.
Okay, that's a physical layer, absolutely. Wireless access point, name another. Yes?
A router.
Router, kind of. There is a physical transmission that takes place between the access point and the router.
They were connected by a cable.
He's either connected by a cable, in this case he's not, he's connected with a network interface card at the physical layer. What were you going to say? Somewhere behind this access point is a switch, probably. Because that wire, see that yellow wire up there? Even though that's a wireless access point, that yellow wire connects it to the backbone of the school's network. Okay, yes? What's that? Not yet. SMTP is not at the physical layer. SMTP is, well, we'll get into that here in a little bit. All right? So you get the idea. There are a lot of things in between. And at the physical layer, I mean, there are lots of physical devices that have to take place. Depending on where that transmission is, at the time that we say it, it's going to be a different, there are lots of physical things. But on his computer, we've got a network interface card. On his computer, we have a network interface card. And in this particular case, it's a wireless network interface card. So, let's start breaking it down. At the physical layer, you need to know this. Their examples are weak, but as we mentioned, network interface card, cables, RJ45 connections, wireless cards, cabling in the wall, patch panels, which are, you'll see an example of that. Hey, by the way, well, we'll talk about that later, the field trip. Punch blocks, we don't use punch blocks anymore, no one uses those. Hubs, we use switches, and multi-station access units, nobody uses those anymore. But those are all examples of physical devices. Concepts include topologies, what type of encoding, whether it's going to be electrical signals going across the wire, or whether it's going to be light signals. The things that create those signals are all at the physical layer. The unit of measurement used on this layer is bits, right? And bits per second. Physical layer. Okay? Again, you have these slides. You don't necessarily have to write these slides down verbatim. Okay. We have the physical layer. What's the next one up?
Data link layer?
Data link layer. What's the next one up?
Network layer.
Okay, those three layers combined make up the communication subnetwork. Okay, it's not a layer. Communication subnetwork is not a layer of the OSI model. It's a grouping of the first three layers of the OSI model. So the communication subnetwork is made up of the first three. It doesn't matter what you're sending from one computer to the other. The communication subnetwork is responsible for transmitting that information. Okay, just kind of put that in the back of your head. So at some point, you can count on a question on a quiz or a test that says, what layers of the OSI model make up the communication subnetwork? Okay? All right. So I've got this OSI model, and I'm the manufacturer. I've got this high-tech new network card that's functioning at exabit per second, exabits per second. There are certain rules. There are no standards for exabits per second, I don't think yet. There are standards for unshielded twisted pair. There are standards for wireless technologies already established. And those are written, anyone know what those are written in? Okay, those, we'll make this a little homework assignment later, okay? Those standards exist. They're based upon certain rules, general rules of the OSI model, but those standards are written down. And when I create that network card, I need to adhere to those standards. If I want to come up with a new standard, I have to submit those requests and get them approved, and that's to my advantage because I want exabits per second speeds to be the new standard. And I want, because if I've got a card that's functioning at, 10 exabits per second, then if the switch isn't capable of handling it, it doesn't do me any good. So I'm going to follow those standards so that the switch manufacturers will follow the same standards and the cable manufacturers will follow the same standards, and they'll all be able to use my card so I can sell lots and make millions of dollars. Okay? All right. Now, what you need to understand is the difference between baseband and broadband. Okay, so structure your notes such that you have a definition of baseband and you have a separate definition of broadband. Okay? In baseband communications, unshielded twisted pair communications, right? You're cabling. If I'm connected using an Ethernet card to an unshielded twisted pair network, I'm using baseband. That's a standard. That's one of those many standards. We're all communicating on the same frequency in baseband. All right? In broadband, however, anyone ever wonder how you've got one single, and you got to think about this, you can't just assume it's going to happen. You have one single cable with hundreds of channels on it. Hundreds of channels. How in the heck do you have one cable with hundreds of different channels on it? Anyone ever wonder that? You have a device, used to be a cable box, right? Now it's a cable modem. You have a device that breaks those channels out into, defines those and identifies those as different frequencies. Different frequencies, okay? And if they're being transmitted as different frequencies, then I can tune in to this frequency, and it's like a radio. You tune into different frequencies. Well, in electronic communications, as far as computers are concerned, these frequencies are different electronic frequencies, and they're communication frequencies, similar to a radio, but used in wired communications. Okay? Baseband, single frequency. Broadband, multiple frequencies. Okay? So, if I have a gigabit broadband connection to the internet, there are multiple frequencies taking place or transmitting within that Ethernet connection. Okay? Broadband versus baseband. Broadband, multiple frequencies. Baseband, single frequency. Layer 2, data link layer. All right, some examples of the data link layer. MAC addresses. Switches operate primarily at the data link layer. You can write that down verbatim. Switches operate primarily, which means not exclusively, but primarily at the data link layer. The data link layer of the OSI model and all the protocols or devices that are associated with the data link layer of the OSI model are responsible for getting frames transmitted properly, okay, and accurately. A switch, because it operates primarily at the data link layer, keeps track of, now think about what a switch is. We have a physical box with 8 different ports on it, or 12 different ports, or 36 different ports on it. Each one of those ports keeps track of the device that was connected to it. So you take your computer, right here, plug in a cable to it. That cable may have 5 other cables through patch panels and such, ends up connecting to a port in the switch. No other computers are connected to that port in the switch. That port in the switch knows what the media access control address is, or the MAC address for this computer, right? Jill's is different. Hers connects to a different port. So it knows what those addresses are. So when her computer wants to talk to a different address, it knows I need to move this communication over to this port instead of this port. When she wants to go back to that port, it knows, okay, that's a MAC address, that's one I need to communicate with. So the switch is responsible for keeping track of all that stuff. The network interface card has a MAC address associated with it, 1, and it's unique among all other MAC addresses of all cards that are produced. Theoretically, that happens. However, I've heard that there are duplications. Manufacturers have gotten together, looked at the standards, they've been assigned blocks of MAC addresses. Every network interface card that they create, that they manufacture, has a unique MAC address. Part of it is the manufacturer ID, part of it is the type of card, part of it is the actual individual signature of the card itself. Okay, so a switch will keep track of all that stuff. And that way, what is the thing that's unique about a switch compared to a hub? Michael? Okay, it only communicates to the host that it wants to. Okay, and what's that called? There's a name for it. What is the name for that? No idea? We just covered this last chapter. What's the name for it? Unicast transmissions, unicast communications. So if it's only transmitting to the one it wants to, the MAC address it wants to, that's considered a unicast connection. Okay. So far so good, everybody with me? I know it's all very theoretical and all very extremely boring, but that's okay. We just talked about MAC addresses. That stands for MAC, stands for Media Access Control Address. We've gone through this. Each of your network interface cards has a unique MAC address. And that's kept track of in hexadecimal notation. If you look at the MAC address under this specific network card, Ethernet adapter, local area connection, physical address, it's always 12 digits in groups of 2 each. So the MAC address for this card is 00-1C-C0, blah, blah, blah. Everybody go out to your command prompt. Type in ipconfig /all. And I want you to tell me the MAC address. I want you to tell me the MAC address that's associated with your Ethernet connection. Wired, local area connection 1, Ethernet connection. Give me the last 4 of your MAC address.
How do we get to it?
Huh?
I didn't hear it all.
Go to a command prompt. Type ipconfig /all. Last 4 digits of the MAC address of your Ethernet card or local area connection 1, I believe. Ethernet card. You only have one.
Oh, I got it.
I didn't call on you, so just hold. Johnny, what is yours? Read the last four. There you go. Yeah, what is it? I'm sorry? The last four characters of the MAC address, which is going to be Ethernet adapter, right? MAC address right there. What are they? Just the last four. 38-EF. Does anyone in this room have the last four? Many of you have the same exact computer that he's got. Does anyone have the last four digits being, or the last four characters being 38 what'd you say, EF? EF. 38-EF. No, because they're all unique. Even though you have the exact same computer, same operating system, same everything, different names of the computers, the MAC address, the physical address of that network interface card is different. Okay? That's how a switch, the switch that's connected to this guy, is able to keep track of all these different MAC addresses. Any questions? Okay, layer 2 switches. You'll also hear layer 3 switches, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But layer 2 switches work primarily at the data link layer, layer 2. Layer 2 switch, hardware base, use MAC addresses. Every port on the switch is mapped to the specific MAC address of the computer that physically connects to it. So this switch, now keep in mind that the MAC addresses you just gave me are not connected. Right? They're not connected because that's the Ethernet port. That's a little RJ45 connection. The MAC addresses on your wireless card are being kept track by some device up here, either the wireless access point here, if it's a switch also, or the switch behind it. Keeps track of all these different MAC addresses. Okay, so that's how it is able to maintain unicast connections. But here's something to keep in mind. Most switches keep track of their MAC addresses. They're kept track of in volatile memory. What do I mean by that? They're kept track of in volatile, V-O-L-A-T-I-L-E, memory. Anyone have any idea what that means? You might read that term in the book, you might read it on the internet. So they're only kept track of in volatile memory. They're kept track of in their own RAM, random access memory. You might know what that means. Yes?
It's sort of like the RAM is sort of like the memory, like when my computer's doing something, it sends the information there so that it can be withdrawn by the processor.
So what, Austin, is the difference between the storage in RAM versus storage on the hard drive? There's a big difference.
The RAM is every time the computer shuts off or reboots or whatever, it gets completely wiped.
Yes.
While the hard drive, obviously
It's
stays
permanent
the same.
storage, or
Yeah.
as permanent as you can get with any physical device. Very good point. So RAM is volatile. If it loses power, it loses all of those addresses. Hard drive, however, once it's written out to the magnetic, or depending on the type of media it is, optical media, it's stored there until somebody physically wipes it. If it loses power, it's still there. Switches, normally, if they lose power, they lose track of all those MAC addresses. And so what you'll find is, in a network, if you lose power on the network, or if the switch gets unplugged and reset, then it takes a long time for communications to reestablish regularly on a timely basis, because now the switch has to memorize those MAC addresses all over again. And so if you're not communicating on the switch, and now you start communicating, it doesn't know, or somebody else wants to communicate to you, it doesn't know where to send that signal because it's lost it. It's lost that MAC address. It's not in its memory, which is volatile. It means that if you unplug it or lose power to it, it wipes it. You're going to need to know the meaning of volatile memory. A MAC flood attack. Okay, so if, this is dynamic also. So let's say, for example, that we have a computer plugged into a switch, and then we immediately unplug that computer and plug another computer in, and it starts transmitting. Okay? Well, the switch has to go through the process of saying, hey, something's wrong here. This MAC address is no longer communicating on this port, so I need to learn this new one, and I need to get rid of the old one. Wipe the old one, remember the new one, and associate it with this particular port, port 3. All right? Well, if you are an evil person and want to bring down a local area network, don't even think about it, Jordan, and bring down a network, then one technique for doing that is doing this flood attack, which we'll talk about here in just a second. You send all these MAC addresses to ports, a port or ports. The switch is trying to, it's like a denial of service attack. It's trying to learn all these over and over and over again, and while it's learning them, it stops working. Okay? But let's talk about this. We talked about this. Forget the CAM table, you don't have to memorize that. But you need to do need to know what a MAC flood attack is. This isn't a bunch of sandwiches floating down a river. That'd be awesome. Getting hungry. Okay. A MAC flood attack, a device sends thousands and millions of MAC addresses to the switch in an effort to make that switch stop communicating. All right, virtual LAN. We talked about this briefly in the last chapter. Again, that last chapter, as someone very astutely pointed out, is nothing more than an introduction to all these other subsequent chapters. Okay, so if I want, look, here's an example. A client I was at yesterday up in Benton Harbor has 220 devices on their overall network. This could be servers, it could be laptops, it could be switches, it could be 220 different devices. All these different devices come back to a central wiring closet, and in that central wiring closet I have a patch panel where they're physically punched down. Non-intelligent device, it just simply gives me a place to plug in my RJ45 connections. They go to the switch. So from the patch panel, I've got a little patch cable that's 3 feet long going to the switches. And it's a core switch that has 96 ports on it. Okay?
Wow.
Those 96 ports are broken up into 3 VLANs, virtual local area networks. So if we didn't have any VLANs, all 96 ports would be able to communicate with each other by memorizing the MAC addresses of the host devices that are physically plugged in to those switch ports. However, in this particular network, I have, of those 220 devices, I've got 76 phones, I've got 70 laptops, and then I've got 70 other devices. And I'm making this up. I don't remember how it's broken out, but let's just say 76 phones, 70 computers that are communicating, and then let's say 70 phones that are communicating to, no, that doesn't do any good. 76 and 70, let's just do it. Those are broken up into 2 VLANs. I don't want the phones, even though they're talking internet protocol, I don't want the phones communicating with the computers. Separate, completely separate devices, entirely different set of rules, entirely different IP addressing. I don't want them talking to the computers. And the reason I don't want them talking to the computers is they tend to broadcast. When they boot up, they broadcast. I've got 70 phones. They're all the time rebooting. They broadcast to be able to communicate and establish themselves on the computer, on the phone network. Well, that broadcast traffic, because of the rules of CSMA-CD, that broadcast traffic slows down the rest of my network. It keeps those devices, while these guys are broadcasting, it keeps the other 70 computers that need to be able to communicate, keeps them from communicating. So I want all that broadcast traffic separated. We used to do that with routers before we had smart switches. We used to have to do that with routers. The problem then is that, you know, if you want to segregate broadcast traffic, you put a router in, and now all the traffic is going through this bottleneck of one port on this side, one port on this side, and the routers were too slow to be able to communicate when they wanted to communicate. But in this particular case, I don't care if those phones communicate with these other VLANs. So I create 96 ports. I carve it into however many ports I need for the phone network, and then the remainder are on the computer network. That's a VLAN. Two purposes for a VLAN. Who name one? Somebody name one purpose for a VLAN. Yes, Austin. To prevent collisions, absolutely. Caitlin, you got anything?
If you have a group of people that you don't, that you just want to sit in the area, you can use your own.
Yep, if I've got a group of people, let's say an accounting department, so from a security standpoint, I can segregate them and protect that data or devices that are on that VLAN. So two purposes. One, prevent collisions and broadcasts. In essence, what Austin said was more accurate than what I said, to prevent collisions, because broadcast traffic by itself isn't necessarily bad. It's the collisions that are created by broadcast traffic that are bad. So prevent collisions and to secure. And we do this through one of those other rules. You know, we have 802.3, which defines UTP or Ethernet transmissions. We have now 802.1q, which is another standard, electronic standard, which defines how you create a VLAN. And so this is really cool. This is important. Because switch manufacturers follow the 802.1q, which I think is outdated, but there's another name for it. But they follow that standard, which is put out by the International Electrical something, whatever. They follow that standard. I can have a Cisco switch with a VLAN tag of this, have the exact same, and be able to communicate with the exact same VLAN tagging on an HP switch over here, because they're following the same basic rules. So the value of these standards is that I can have different manufacturers doing the same kinds of things, creating VLANs, and those switches can communicate with each other. Does that make sense? They're following those standards. Now, VLAN hopping. Okay, so I can set up other rules within those VLANs to say, even though these ports are on one VLAN, and these ports are on a different VLAN, this particular port can hop to this particular port, because occasionally they need to be able to communicate with each other. Okay? All right, take a much needed break. Turn that off, please, or stop recording.